So this video is based on education reform, and it's looking at it with regards to supply side policies and trying to boost the labour market. So education reforms, they're focusing on obviously students in preparing them for when they graduate to, I suppose, enter those more productive industries and to develop their skills so they're ready to boost national output as soon as they join the labour market. So I've already mentioned the PISA results in another video I've done on educational reforms. And within this video, we're going to focus on the UK. And in recent years, the UK has continued to improve within these results. And even in 2019, they showed improvement from the previous year of 2018. But they're still lagging behind the likes of Singapore and Finland, which I mentioned in the previous video. Now, Singapore, they're second in previous results. In the last 5 years, they've been top. And Singapore spent a lot of time looking at how to improve their education, because once upon a time they had a very low skilled workforce, and now, as you can see here, they've got one of the most productive labour forces in terms of education there is. So within this video, we're going to focus mostly on one education secretary, and we're going to look at Gove. Because when Gove came into that role for the government, he made some really drastic and significant changes to education, something that we haven't seen in our lifetime. So therefore, what I want to do within this video is look at kind of the reasons why he did it, the consequences of those, and whether they would act as a supply-side policy in terms of boosting the productive potential of the economy. So just a reminder, what we're trying to achieve with supply-side policies is we're trying to get long-run aggregate supply to shift to long-run aggregate supply 2, because what you can do there is increase the national output from Y1 to Y2. Now, with long-run aggregate supply 1, that is where the current productive potential of the economy is. But if we're able to boost that productive potential, then what we can do is we can obviously produce a greater output than we could before. Now, if we focus on the labour force, what we're trying to do is make them much more productive. So their skills are enhanced. I suppose the youth that is coming through into the labour market can produce more than the previous youth could when they entered the labour market. And we're trying to make it so the economy can produce more without causing inflationary pressure. So what we should be able to do is remain at that stable price level even when there is an increase of AD1 to AD2. So in terms of Gove, he made some really, really big changes in 2010 when he introduced the white paper, and this was pretty much all his policies that he was going to bring into education. And some of the reforms included compulsory study of a foreign language up to the age of 16. He was going to completely change how GCSEs and A-levels were taken in terms of making it more exam focused. He was going to actually completely change the grades and how it was graded, and actually put in strict guidelines as to how, I suppose, the content of what was being taught, making it much more rigorous, making it much more challenging for students. He also introduced targets for primary schools, and he made changes to how trainee teachers would spend training to become teachers, having more time in the classroom and having more written tests as part of their training.
We're changing the way, I hope, in which the league table system works. At the moment, there are specific incentives to go down a particular route, and that route takes too many students away from subjects like foreign languages, history, and the hard sciences. I want to change the league table system so we restore a new incentive. I want to create a new qualification which we can reward people for doing well in all these areas by securing. And above all, I want to ensure that the exams themselves become tougher and more rigorous over time, which is why I'll be changing the way that exams are regulated to ensure that every GCSE stands comparison with the world's best qualifications. In every country that we measure ourselves against, in France, in Holland, in Singapore, and in America, children at the age of 16 are expected to be strong in their own language, in a foreign language, in science, in a subject like history. But our children aren't held to the same high standards. I think it is terrible bigotry to say that because children come, perhaps from a poorer background, that they shouldn't be taught proper subjects in a rigorous way. And there's no tension between expecting children to get to a high standard in all these subjects and also expecting them to do well in other areas which will prepare them for the world of work. I don't make any apology for having high expectations of our state education system, because the very best teachers, those we're celebrating today, operate on the basis that every child can succeed.
So I'm just going to go over some of his main policies. I'm just going to come to three. So policy number one, he ushered in a new wave of school autonomy. So what he did was he took the idea that Labour brought in terms of academies, and he pretty much rolled it out to the whole country. So in terms of rolling out nationwide, 60% of all English secondary schools and 14% of primary schools were made into academies. But that was only 5 years later on from when, I suppose, academies kind of were brought in by Labour. Now it's probably even greater than that. Okay, the majority of schools would be or will be academies. And he explained that these new academy chains would provide economies of scale, because they were obviously becoming trusts. They were focused on different campuses. They could kind of use that bargaining power to kind of negotiate for greater supplies, maybe greater bargaining power in terms of sponsors. Could do a range of different things. And again, it could allow these trusts to collaborate greater in terms of schools around certain local areas. The second policy was GCSEs and how they were changed in terms of the grading. So it went from the A star to kind of the FG to the 1 to 9. So it began an overhaul of the qualifications regime. Controlled assessments came to an end, so there was no coursework with the exception of science. So GCSE and A-level examinations we reformed to become more challenging, and that's where the new GCSEs came in, because that 9 was meant to be that ultimate A-star, and the whole GCSE was going to be much more challenging and stretch students further. The EBAC came in with Progress 8, which became a new accountability measures that encouraged schools to focus on the achievement of all pupils across a broad range of academic subjects. Gove was quite negative about the old exam boards in terms of the content that was being taught, and he believed that it wasn't intellectual enough, and therefore he went on to change that. So he didn't agree with what was being taught and enforced changes in subjects such as English, math, science, computing, history, and design technology. So 5-year-olds, for example, would now learn fractions and computer coding, while those in earlier secondary schools will have to study at least 2 Shakespeare plays. Now, some praised the moves and believed that he was right in terms of making it more challenging. However, all these policies brought a strong response. Whether it was almost like Marmite, you either loved them or you hated them. What we're going to delve into now is some of the consequences and the negative factors that occurred because of these changes. So a lot of decision making that Gove actually did, and he confessed to this, was not based on evidence. So he had very little advice from experts within education in terms of these changes that he was making. And he said it's not based on evidence but on a hunch. I had little coming to me from civil servants that presented the latest academic evidence. Too often they just serve up practical advice about how the minister can do what he or she wants, but politicians are prone to make decisions based on ideology and personal experience. So he believed that from his own personal experiences, you can probably imagine when Gove went to school, it was quite a while ago, and the type of school that he actually attended, very, very different to your standard state school. A lot of his changes were based on those old, experiences that he personally had.
It's in classrooms that the changes wrought by Michael Gove have been most keenly felt. In 4 years in charge, he's relentlessly followed his vision for education, changing not only what happens in schools, but also the way they're run, and attracting both support and criticism along the way.
I think Michael Gove has become a Marmite figure and has allowed his personality and the way he presents his policies to become the central issue.
But it's his policies Michael Gove will want to be remembered for. He introduced free schools, which have more say over what they teach. He expanded academies, which are free from local council control, and he toughened up GCSE and A-level exams. His detractors have accused him of changing too much too quickly. He's intensely disliked by teaching unions, who today celebrated his departure.
I think that Michael Gove is the most unpopular Secretary of State for Education with teachers and with those who work in education that I have ever in my professional life experienced.
But those in favour of Michael Gove's reforms are just as enthusiastic in their backing.
And so when you type in all of these...
Already nearly 200 free schools are open. While some are controversial, most are oversubscribed. It's just one element of what supporters see as his legacy.
He brought vitality and passion to the job to drive up standards. What he's done is got to work through. There's virtually no more changes he can make, quite frankly. He's been the great sort of changer in education, and it's better that he goes on to something else.
Now he has moved on, and this is his replacement, Nicky Morgan, a former Treasury Minister with a young son who's risen quickly and quietly in Westminster since being elected in 2010.
Were you brought in to make peace after Michael Gove?
It's unlikely Nicky Morgan will undo Michael Gove's radical reforms. In fact, it's thought she's a supporter. But with less than a year until the general election, there's no doubt it's hoped having someone less controversial in charge of education will help win back some support, not least from teachers. Alex Forsyth, BBC News.
Okay, so in terms of the response, what we're going to look at is some of the evidence that came back from experts within education that criticised a lot of Gove's policies, believing that they actually had a really detrimental impact on children. So first of all, if we look at academies, so the evidence suggests that academy change very widely in the quality of the service and support they provide to schools. So Lord's very own Educational Policy Institute reveals that at secondary level, 9 of the worst school groups in England are multi-academy trusts, which makes up a disproportionate number of the lowest performing. So Gove's dash to create a school marketplace where competition replaced collaboration between schools has led to a very unfortunate outcome, being more concerned with the quality of their brand than with the responsibilities to the schools, the pupils and the parents which they should be serving. So there has been a lot of criticism in the media and within, I suppose, local councils and so on, about the role that academies are playing, and many believe that they should go back under the local council's control. And because of academies, and I suppose the reality of something that's known as an orphan school is being created, and that's these schools that are performing really badly and actually unable to attract a sponsoring academy, and therefore they're left without support. So the most disadvantaged pupils in England have fallen further behind their peers and are now on average over 2 full years of learning behind non-disadvantaged pupils by the end of the secondary school. And some of the blame is based on those academies and this concept of an orphan school. So just a reminder, orphan schools are those who are academies but are not getting the sponsorship that they need to actually drive the funding and improve the facilities within the school. With regards to the grades, there was widespread confusion about the existing A to G and the new 9 to 1. Schools felt like they weren't getting enough guidance from exam boards based on it, and actually exam boards didn't believe that they were getting enough guidance from the government in terms of what they wanted. So in a recent ATL snapshot poll, 88% of respondents declared that parents and carers did not understand the new GCSE grading system. So therefore, if parents didn't understand it, the likelihood of employers also not understanding it, which is an issue. So it's not surprising that teachers who responded to the poll complained that the information provided by exam boards about standards expected for a grade 4 or a grade 5 was entirely inadequate. And it, like I said, everybody involved, whether it was teachers, whether it was principals, whether it was students, whether it was parents, whether it was employers, it did create a lot of confusion about that. Now, in terms of how do we know if these policies were a success or not, I suppose it's too early to actually decide that at this moment in time. There has been an increase in mental health issues which could be a consequence of these examinations. There has been an increase in inequality within disadvantaged statistics in terms of the grades that I said about before. Again, could that be because of the academies and the policies? It's difficult because also at the same time, the economy has been experiencing austerity from the government in terms of cuts, and there's been other factors to take into account. So it's really, really difficult to actually judge as to whether these policies and these reforms have been successful, because we have to pretty much wait until a whole generation of students have gone through the educational system to see the impact it has on productivity. So this is another issue with supply-side policies with regards to education. They do take a long time to actually see the results, and sometimes you can't even really see the results because of other factors that are involved.